Part 1. The rumor beneath the ice in the Arctic. Rumors travel faster than the wind. When the first man claimed he had seen a black river moving under the ice, no one believed him. It sounded like frostbitten nonsense, something a lonely hunter mutters after too many days alone in the tundra. But then, 2 days later, the same words came from a second mouth, and a third. They said there was a stretch of frozen lake where the ice groaned at night, like the water beneath was alive. They spoke of shadows moving in thick schools, fish more than anyone had seen in a lifetime. Not a few dozen, not a few hundred, they said millions. For a village that had been scraping by on scraps of dried meat and seal fat. The rumor was dangerous. Hope in the Arctic is a fragile thing, too much of it, and it can shatter hearts when it breaks. The elders listened, frowned, and said nothing. But the younger hunters began sharpening ice chisels. By the third day, the rumors became a plan. They would take the biggest nets the village owned, the kind used once in a decade for a communal hunt, and they would cut through the thickest ice they could find. The catch, if the rumor was true, could feed everyone until the sun came back. That morning, the temperature dropped to -50 for C. A storm had just passed, leaving the air so clear it seemed sharp enough to cut skin. Frost clung to every beard, every hood, every rope coil. The ice axes clanged like bells as they were loaded onto sleds, pulled by teams of reindeer snorting clouds into the still air. The lake was 3 hours away across open snowfields. The wind had carved the drifts into sharp ridges that caught the sled runners and made every jolt rattle teeth. By the time they saw the first glint of the lake's frozen surface, the sky was the color of hammered steel, and the air smelled of distant snow. The elders stayed behind, keeping fires lit in case the hunters returned empty-handed and frozen. Children clung to doorframes, watching the sleds vanish into the pale horizon. This was no ordinary fishing trip. This was a gamble with the cold, a race against hunger itself. The lake lay silent when they arrived, a sheet of white stretched, as far as the eye could see, broken only by wine-scoured patches of bare, blue-black ice. The first chisel strike rang out, a sharp crack that echoed across the frozen emptiness. Then another, and another. They worked in pairs, trading blows, their breath steaming, hands numb even through sealskin gloves. Chips of ice flew like shards of glass, stinging cheeks. Beneath the first meter of snow and ice, the color darkened, water was near, and with it, maybe, the truth. A young hunter named Kirill was the first to kneel over the opening and peer down. The water below rippled unnaturally, disturbed from below. Something was moving. He pulled off a glove, ignoring the bite of the cold, and dipped his fingers in. The surface trembled. A shape passed under his hand, not one fish, not 10, but a mass, a living tide. His voice cracked when he shouted, "They're here. Gods help us, they're here." The nets were unrolled, long enough to stretch across half the village square. Men and women tied ropes with stiff, frozen fingers, feeding them under the ice with hooked poles. The plan was simple: corral the fish into a trap, then pull them out until the hole froze shut again. What they didn't expect was the sheer force of the water once the fish began to move. The surface bucked like a living thing, the ice groaning under the shifting weight. For the first time in decades, the village might have found more food than they could carry home. But the Arctic never gives without taking something back. Part 2. The battle under the ice. The first pull on the net nearly tore the ropes from their hands. The ice hole boiled black as the fish churned beneath, a single writhing mass. Kirill and 2 others dug in their heels, the leather of their boots scraping against the slick ice. The rope thrummed like a living thing, each jerk threatening to snap it clean. "Pull together," shouted old Mikhail, the only man alive who still remembered the great catch of '61. His beard was a solid block of frost, and his eyes glinted with something between greed and awe. "If you lose the first haul, you'll lose them all." They pulled in unison, shoulders straining, bodies leaning back against the weight. The net began to rise, heavy as stone, dripping black water that froze midair into tiny, glittering daggers. The first fish broke the surface, fat, silver-backed, with eyes wide and still thrashing. Then another, then 10, then 20. The hole seemed to erupt with them. Each fish hit the ice with a dull thud. flipping and sliding away until someone pinned it down. The hunters shouted to one another, tossing the catch into waiting sleds. Even the women who had come along were knee-deep in the haul, their hands red from the cold, scooping fish like gold from a river. But the lake didn't give quietly. The mass of fish fought the net, twisting, surging in bursts that sent icy spray into the air. One slip, one loose knot, and the entire catch could vanish back into the black water. More than once, the rope burned through frozen gloves, taking skin with it. The cold made everything harder. Ice began to form on the ropes themselves, adding weight and making every pull an agony. The opening in the ice started freezing at the edges, slowly trying to close its teeth on the hunter's arms and nets. Kirill took an axe to it, swinging between hauls to keep the water free. The sound of steel on ice rang like bells across the lake. Hours passed in a blur of shouting, pulling, and the slap of fish on ice. Breath turned to steam clouds so thick they mingled into one shifting fog above the hole. The sleds filled, one after another, the weight of them pressing the runners deep into the snow. Some were so heavy they'd need extra reindeer to move by midday. They'd already caught enough to feed the village for weeks, but no one stopped. The school below seemed endless, and greed, or maybe survival instinct, kept them working. If they could store enough before the deep freeze set in, they'd have a buffer against the kind of winter that starved villages out of existence. Then came the first crack. It wasn't the normal, harmless groan of shifting ice. This was sharper, longer, like a whip tearing through the air. The hunters froze, every face turning toward the sound. It came again, this time beneath their boots, a deep, resonant shudder. The lake was shifting under their weight, the ice complaining. "Keep moving," McCall barked. "Don't stand in one place." They spread out instinctively, pulling from different angles to ease the pressure. Still, the cracks spread, thin silver lines that spidered out in every direction from the hole. The water below seemed to surge higher, almost eager to claim the air above. And then they saw it, a shadow in the water, bigger than any fish, moving with slow, deliberate power. It wasn't the net, it wasn't the haul, it was something else, and it was rising. The cold suddenly didn't feel like the most dangerous thing on the lake. Part 3. The shadow beneath thing under the ice moved with a slow confidence that made the hair on Kirill's neck rise. Fish scattered in a silver panic, fleeing to the edges of the hole as if pushed aside by something claiming its space. "Seal?" someone whispered. But seals didn't move like that. This shadow was too big, too heavy, and its shaper, it seemed, to stretch longer and longer the closer it came. The ice vibrated. It wasn't a crack this time. It was the deep thrum of muscle against frozen water. The ropes in their hands went slack for a moment, the net twisting oddly, as if the hull itself was trying to get away from what was coming. Then, in one smooth, terrible motion, the shadow surged upward. A head the size of a barrel broke the surface, water exploding outward and freezing instantly in the air. Two black eyes stared at them, ancient, unblinking. A walrus. Not one of the young ones they sometimes saw hauled up on the riverbanks, but an old bull. Its tusks as long as a man's arm, yellowed and scarred from decades of battles. It roared, and the sound was like stone grinding on stone. Steam blasted from its nostrils. The smell of it, rank, briny, wild, hit them harder than the cold wind. "Back! Back!" McCall shouted, swinging the haft of his axe toward the beast. But the walrus wasn't attacking, not yet. It lunged at the net instead, thrashing and biting, sending fish scattering like coins spilled on the ice. It was clear what had happened. The hunters had dropped their net into the middle of the walrus's hunting ground. The massive bull had been feeding on the trapped fish, and now they were trying to take them away. The men hesitated. A bull walrus could crush a boat, or a man with a single strike. But the haul they'd already pulled up was enough to keep the village fed for months. If they ran now, the beast would have it all back within minutes. Kirill gritted his teeth. "We drive it off." His voice shook. From the cold or the fear, even he couldn't tell. "If we lose this haul, we lose the winter." The next few moments were chaos. Men shouted, swinging poles and axes at the ice to make noise. One threw a burning bundle of dried moss into the water, the steam clouding the air. The walrus bellowed, rising higher, its massive body gleaming, black in the weak sunlight. Then it lunged, not for the men, but for the sled nearest the hole. In a single heave, it knocked the entire load of fish into the water. Half a day's work gone in seconds. The hunters roared in anger, surging forward, beating at the ice with everything they had. The walrus snarled again, tusks flashing, before sliding back into the dark water, leaving only swirling shadows and the sharp stink of sea animal musk behind. No one spoke for a moment. The ice crackled softly under their boots, the only sound besides the ragged breathing of exhausted men. Finally, McCall spat into the snow. "It'll be back," he said flatly, "and next time, it won't just want the fish." The cold had returned to feeling like the second biggest problem on the lake. Part 4, the last hobby. The time the walrus returned, the sky had shifted to that strange half-light of Arctic dusk, where the sun hovers just below the horizon, staining the world in blue and gold. The cold had deepened to the kind that gnaws through bone. Every breath hurt. They had rebuilt the net, larger this time, anchored with ice stakes driven deep into the frozen crust. The fish were biting again, their silver bodies flashing below like coins in a sunken hoard. Every man there knew this was the last try. If the walrus took it, the village would face the hunger they'd been dreading since autumn. The ice trembled before they saw it. A low shadow slid under the surface, circles of frost blooming where it exhaled. Then a dark bulk rose in the hole, but this time the hunters were ready. Kirill was at the edge, spear in hand, a length of rope tied around his waist and anchored to a sled. McCall stood opposite him, gripping a harpoon as old as the settlement itself, its iron point blackened with seal blood from decades past. The younger men flanked them with poles, ready to drive the beast back. The walrus came up in a surge, water exploding over the ice, freezing instantly to glassy shards. Its tusks hooked the net, trying to rip it free. Fish scattered in a frenzy, and the rope went taut, straining against the ice stakes. "Hold!" Kirill roared, planting his feet. The walrus lunged again, and this time McCall struck, the harpoon driving into the thick hide just below the neck. The bull bellowed, a deep, guttural roar that seemed to shake the very air. It thrashed, churning the water into a whirlpool, sending slabs of ice skittering across the hole. Kirill and the others hauled on the net, dragging it away from the creature's reach. But the walrus was relentless. It dove, then slammed upward. From below, its sheer weight threatening to split the ice beneath them. Then, a sharp crack split the air. One of the stakes tore loose. The net began to slide toward the hole. "Not today," Kirill snarled. With a burst of strength, he wrapped the rope twice around his arm and heaved backward. The sled groaned, but it held. The men surged forward, as one, dragging the net away in a final, desperate heave. The walrus let out one last roar, a sound of frustration, rage, and hunger, before it slid back into the dark. The hunters stood there, panting clouds into the frozen air. The net lay on the ice, heavy with hundreds of fish, their silver scales glinting in the blue dusk. No one spoke until McCall broke the silence. "Load it up," he said, voice hoarse. "The beast will heal, but we have a winter to survive. Ours." Later, the sleds rolled into the village under the faint shimmer of the northern lights. Fires lit the snow in warm orange glow as the people gathered, voices rising in relief and joy. Children laughed, clutching slippery fish in mittened hands. Elders blessed the catch. And somewhere, far out on the black water, the walrus swam in the cold silence, waiting for the day when hunger would bring it back to the ice. The village slept that night with full bellies, and a story they would tell for generations.